Since the Sandbox fans, we're back for our second episode here at the Workbar in Quincy. Shout out to Rosie for hooking us up, letting us come in here and debut the new studio. Definitely a great space if you want to come in here and either try and get a different scenery for your podcast. All the equipment is here. You also have your workspace if you want to work on, creating content and partnering up. But if you're in a different type of work-life environment and things like that, you can come in here, rent out some conference rooms, very quiet spaces. If you're a remote worker, come in, you get coffee, you can bring some lunch. Really good time, and everyone's really welcoming. It's super clean in here, super bright, and not a far drive from the city by any means. So really excited to be debuting the podcast studio here, and happy that we're able to, add this to the Since the Sandbox list one. So thank you for joining me here today. But we have the NFC South schedule predictions. We gave you guys all the North. We gave you guys the AFC South. But before we break down the NFC South, we want to make sure that you guys are joining us August 17th. It's a Saturday night from 6 to 10 at the Orient Heights Yacht Club in East Boston. We'll be celebrating 5 years as a podcast, a little celebration. Going to be doing a live show. So you guys got to come and check that out. Come and watch us live, and you guys can be in the background. Love that for you. And then we get a little Uncle Tony, Young Sinatra action with a live music performance. Going to be debuting a lot of brand new merch. So really excited to get that ready for you guys. And it's going to be a good summer. The NFC South schedule predictions are going to get us started with the Panthers, and yeah, it's not going to be a bright one for them.
So they're going 17-0.
Yeah.
So Carolina obviously had a brutal year last year, and they didn't get their number one overall pick because they traded their entire franchise to the Bears for Bryce Young. So don't think things are going to get much better for them this year. They're going to start off with an L right off the bat in New Orleans against the Saints. But I do have them getting a win over the Chargers. Now, I keep seeing that this W number comes up next to the Chargers, and I keep seeing the L number comes up next to the Chargers for you. So it'll be interesting when we get to the West. But after getting a win against the Chargers, I have them dropping 5 straight.
Whew.
Vegas, Cincinnati, at Chicago, home against Atlanta, at Washington before. So I guess I have them starting with a 1-6 record.
Jeez.
1-6, yeah.
Real tough start for the Panthers. I will say I'm a little bit on the opposite side. That's not to say that I think the Carolina Panthers are going to be a great team or a playoff team or anything like that, because they have a lot to figure out. Like, let's be real here. Definitely shouldn't have let go of Brian Burns, but I'll gladly take that lunch money all day. But the Panthers, I think, are going to start off with a win. Look, with week 1 of the NFL season, everybody's like, the Panthers are a guaranteed loss. This team's a guaranteed loss. Ain't going to happen. Division opponent got the Saints the first week. I think that they're going to get a win. I think it's going to be real sloppy, real close. Thank God it's not a primetime game, because who the hell would want to watch these two teams on primetime?
Gosh, no.
Yeah, but I actually have them continuing the second week in a row after getting a win versus the Saints and making all the gamblers lose their 7-leg parlays, taking all the favorites in the world and the most obvious wins. Everyone's like, the Saints can't win 2 in a row. And, of course, they're going to do that versus the Chargers. So I actually have them beating the Chargers. So with the East and the West coming up, it's really interesting to see how these always impact their records and the way everything shakes out. But after those 2 wins of the season, I don't have them getting a win again until week 7 versus Washington. And I don't think that's a guaranteed win by any means. I think, we really got to figure out what's going to happen with the quarterback room there. Is Jaden Daniels going to be the answer for that franchise going forward? But getting 4 losses in the middle of that, Raiders, Bengals, Bears, and Falcons. And then I have them going on another losing streak up until the week 11 bye, losing versus the Broncos, versus the Saints, and then in an international game versus the Giants, also picking up a big fat L.
Yeah, that's what you need to hear. So, Steve, I have it a little bit differently. I have a win over the Broncos. I have a win over the Saints. So they get 2 in a row there, but then I have them going on another 4-game skid. An L against the Giants. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
L against the Chiefs. And I weirdly think the Chiefs game is going to be closer than people think.
Oh my God, I almost gave them a win versus the Chiefs.
Dude, it's going to be such a weird, close game that no one's going to expect.
Like, the Chiefs won't score the whole first half, and it'll be like 6-0, 9-0 Panthers, something like that. And it's just the second half of the season, it's like you might have played a better half, but you got to play a better 4 quarters.
Yep, exactly. And that's where the Chiefs are just going to be able to outget them. But I have them dropping an L to Tampa, and I have them dropping an L to Philly before. And I'm just going to finish it off here.
Yeah.
Getting a win against Dallas, and then losing the next 3. So to Arizona, to Tampa, to Atlanta, finishing with a 4-13 record.
Oof.
Things are tough in Carolina yet again.
Yeah,
but they get to keep their pick.
With the 4-13 record though, like what is the conversation going on? Because this is a team that's in the midst of a new stadium. Bryce Young will only be on like the second year of like his rookie deal. Like, yeah, you know, you got a Leggett, and like they drafted, like, I actually didn't think that they had a horrible draft, especially addressing some of like the offensive pieces that they needed to like throughout this offseason. But with all those guys being young and not really bringing in a lot of different veteran presences to be leaders in that locker room, I feel like that's what kind of makes it like a little bit more difficult. On the second half of the season, I have them getting 2 wins. Those are consecutive wins versus Tampa and at the Eagles. Really tough games. I know going into Philly isn't an easy place to play by any means. The Tampa game, this is a division opponent. I just think that they could sneak, you know, an 18, 16, 15 win versus them. I don't think like any of the wins that the Panthers are going to have are going to be high-scoring games by any means.
Right.
I think the Chiefs game might be a little bit close. I think the Cowboys game will probably be a blowout. I think the Cowboys will take care of business there. But I have them losing to the Cardinals. I actually think that that's going to be a really, really, really close game, honestly. And, you know, if some of these young guys, you know, Sanders, you got Leggett another year of Thielen there, you know, obviously hoping to get a lot more production. But another down year for the Panthers. Do you feel like Leggett or Thielen are going to be guys that are like any sort of like fantasy options, or are these just kind of guys that are going to be, you know, on the waiver wire you might be able to pick up here and there, but not really rostered guys?
I think Leggett's going to be a fantasy option.
Do you?
I think he's going to actually have a pretty productive year, especially for what the Panthers are. Just got to keep in mind that they're going to be down for most of the games. They're going to be throwing. He's going to be their best guy.
North of 140 fantasy points.
Fuck it, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's going to be a solid option. I think he's going to be a flex player that you're going to want to put in. I think Thielen's going to be on another roster by the end of the year.
Do you?
I think he's going to have a couple of productive games. Nothing crazy, but productive. And then
like
trade him. Yeah. Exactly. Go to a Pittsburgh team or something. Go to actually, I think Lou said he was a good fit for Pittsburgh in one of our episodes, but he can go to like a team that has a couple of injured wide receivers. He could end up in KC somehow. And I hate to use KC as that they need a receiver option all the time. Yeah. But we don't know if Rashee Rice is going to fucking play.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't. Thielen will definitely be in like those type of like conversations, like a team that, you know, I'm trying to think in like that type of perspective. I don't think Dallas has the wide receiver group that like people are really, you know, thinking that they did, especially like last year. So I feel like that would be like a solid veteran piece they could potentially add. But I have the Panthers finishing with the 5-12 record, 2-4 in the division. So almost half their wins coming from division opponents, I feel like is obviously something you definitely want to shout out there. I'm going to move over to the Saints, who I don't feel like much is going to change for the Saints. Like, I really don't. I actually think that with a similar ending as to last season, things can get stale. Dennis Allen will probably be on the hot seat. Derek Carr will probably be on the hot seat as well. And this is probably a team that's going to look to get much younger after failing to contend, you know, for 9 or 10 wins to potentially be on top of that division. We'll talk more about that once we get to Tampa and the Falcons, you know, the competent teams from the NFC South. But I have the Saints actually losing the first 3 weeks of the season. Panthers, Cowboys, Eagles. Really tough. I actually thought that they could play the Eagles really close week 3, especially in a home game. But, you know, I just think, like, Philly will probably just, through 4 quarters, prove to be, like, a little bit of a better team. At the end of the day, you can say that they're, you know, definitely more well-coached, and I'd say that they have better quarterback play. Wow, that popcorn smells bomb right now.
I was just thinking, I just got hungry from smelling it. Oh, my God.
Shout out to Workbar Popcorn. Go and get some for free. But after that, a win versus the Falcons, week 4, huge win in a division game as the Falcons are trying to, you know, assert themselves on top of that division. Lost Monday Night Football versus the Chiefs. That's not a close one. And then 2 wins in a row to take us to week 7. A win versus Tampa in a close win versus the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. Ugly, gross game. Thursday Night Football Classic, of course. But at this point in time, this has them at 3-4 to the first 7 weeks.
Nice. So I actually got them winning 2 out of the first 3. I got them beating Carolina. I have them losing at Dallas. I actually have them winning a competitive game against Philly.
Okay.
So I know you said you thought it would be competitive. I do think New Orleans is going to somehow pull this game out. It's going to be a rabbit out of a hat. But I do have them dropping to Atlanta, KC. I think that KC game, I'm right there with you. I think they're going to get 20 piece.
Smoked, yeah.
I think they're getting this just has it written all over it.
Smoking on that Kyrie pack.
And then I got them, yeah, seriously. And then I got them beating Tampa and beating Denver. So I do think they're going to split with Tampa this year, but I also think they're going to win over Denver. I think that, I don't know, Sean Payton's going to say, damn, it was better to be in New Orleans than it was to be in Denver.
Yeah, right. And I think at this point in time in the season where I have them going 3-4, like I don't think that that's a horrible start for them. I still feel like all their goals are really achievable. Yep. This is a team like right around week 7 they start bringing up like the playoff picture. Your team's in the hunt, who's a couple games out of the division,
yep.
and where they only played 1 or 2 division games to this point. I feel like that's when things can really start to turn around. So week 8 they're coming back with a loss at the Chargers. That's a tough game traveling to California, getting a win versus the Panthers week 9. So being able to split that divisional series. Then 2 losses in a row, a loss versus the Falcons, a loss versus the Browns, taking us to the bye in week 12, and then continuing with 2 losses in a row versus the Rams and the Giants. So only getting 1 win through that next set of games through 14 weeks. So this only has them at what? 4 and probably 8 at this point in time in the season. So beginning to get, a little bit hopeless at this point in time.
Yep.
It's you start to question, what's going on. Is Kamara a name that's tossed around in the trade market at that point in time?
Definitely could be.
Yeah, because it's not going to be a guy like Olave that they're looking to build with, going forward. And I think
They got
Kamara,
young guys in that room with like Kendre Miller and all those guys.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think that they can get a lot of capital for a guy. Like Kamara, maybe not a 1 just because of the running back value, but if you can get a 2 from a team and, that's a contender looking to add, or, dude, like maybe the Browns really struggle when Nick Chubb doesn't come back 100% and they're like, hey, like, we worked well with a 2 bell cow, like, committee. Let's go and get Kamara. Imagine Kamara and Chubb like running the AFC North like that.
That would be gross.
It would be, and I think that they would complement each other really well. I think that's the conversation around this time. And then just to finish up the rest, I actually have them winning 3 of their last 4 games, but not enough to make, a dent in the division.
When Rattler comes in.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not crazy about Rattler, but like he'll get an opportunity if this is the case for them. Win versus Washington, loss versus the Packers. Week 16, Monday Night Football versus the Packers, forget about it. You stand no chance. Versus the Raiders and at Tampa to end the season. So sweeping Tampa in the division series, I feel like would be, a big kind of feat for them, but doesn't do more than a 7-10 win. 4-2 in the division is something to speak about, but 7-10 and have no sort of identity or direction going into the 25 season.
Steve, I also have them finishing 7-10. I do have them winning in Green Bay in a crazy ugly game.
Wow,
weird. That's one of the weird ones that I had it circled. That it's just. It smells to me, man. That game smells to me for some reason. It smells like popcorn. It smells worse than popcorn, I'll tell you that. But we're very similar here. I have them taking an L to the Chargers. I do have them taking an L to Carolina. I think they split that series, and I just had them winning the first game of the year. L to Cleveland, L to the Rams, L to the G-Men. Again, you're welcome. Getting a W over Washington, W over Green Bay, and then taking the final 2 L's against Vegas and Tampa Bay.
Okay.
So another 7-10 record for the New Orleans Saints.
There you go. So, I mean, that's a couple behind probably what the top of the division is. I don't know how many wins you're going to have the Falcons. You're going to give us that next. But, if we're talking around 11, 12 win total, and we're talking about a big difference. But I don't have the top of the division being, that high record-wise. I think, some of these teams in Tampa and the Falcons can beat some competitive teams. But I also feel like they can drop some games that it's like, hey, like, if you're going to be a playoff team, like, that's a game you got to win,
Yep. So bringing it right to the Falcons, I have them winning week 1 against Pittsburgh in a really tough game, but I have them surprising teams. I think a lot of people are going to go with Pittsburgh, thinking that kind of the way that you're thinking, right? Is like, oh, people are going to be on Atlanta, but I think people are going to be on Pittsburgh for this game. I think they're going to say that Tomlin goes out there and he wins game 1. He does it more often than not. When he's not playing New England, he goes out there and he wins game 1.
Not New England. It's been a long time since New England.
It has, but that's the last time I can think of like him dropping that first season. Maybe he did it this season. I don't remember, but like he's very, very competitive. They game plan very, very well. And I think a lot of people are going to be high on Pittsburgh in that. I'm going to go with Atlanta win that. But I think when they go to Philly the next week, they're going to get smacked up.
Yeah.
I think they get smacked up big time. And that's eye-opening because I have them going and beating Kansas City back at home. So I have
Not a chance.
I have them pulling out a win against Kansas City.
Not a chance.
I think Kansas City is going to be a team that you take early. Like that's what we said with Baltimore. I think they're going to get taken early. Casey's going to drop that game, but Atlanta's also going to win against New Orleans, Tampa, Carolina following that. Three big division wins. And they end up starting that season 5-1.
That's a strong start for the Falcons. I actually don't think that they're like that talented of a team to go 5-1 at any point in time throughout this season.
And what you got? Tell me about it.
Well, I actually have a stretch of them going 5-1, so maybe I lied a little bit there.
Okay.
I have the Falcons starting off with a loss week 1 versus the Steelers. I just think the Steelers are the better team. You know, those questions about Penix and Cousins might not even be 100% like recovered by the time like this is all going on. I think he'll be throwing. I think that they have the weapons, but I still feel like, you know, the focal point of what the Falcons are going to try and accomplish early is we have to play good defense, and we have to be able to run the football. And I think Raheem Morris has been very vocal about those two things specifically. And, you know, where he's had so much versatility as far as a coach goes. You know, he's been in the defensive back room. He's been in the wide receiver room. He's been a coordinator. So I actually think that this is a good decision for them. And this is somebody that's familiar with their organization, too. So I think it means just that much more. But losing week 1, I actually think the opposite of you, Twan. I actually think that they're going to go into Philly and they're going to get a huge win week 2. I think this is going to be their coming out game. It's like, oh, shit, like Philly won a big game week 1. Yeah, we're going to take care of business because we just beat the Packers. We're going to overlook this Falcons team that thinks that they're the better bird in the NFL. Ain't going to happen. Falcons going to win that game. I think it's going to be close throughout and then could probably pull away at the end with like an interception, maybe a couple field goals towards the end, and just kind of make that game a little bit out of reach. But I think they're going to come back home Sunday Night Football, and they're going to get steamrolled by the Chiefs. I really think that. I don't think that that's the type of conversation that team's in by any means. And look, like let's compare this to a team that we kind of viewed last year that was a little bit progressive through the first half of the season, right? Like the Packers. They didn't start the season off strong by any means. Like there was a point in time where they were probably like 3-3 or so in the beginning of the season, and then just ended up going on a crazy run. I think that that's going to be, you know, very similar case for the Falcons here. I don't think that they're going to finish with as many wins as the Packers did last year, but we'll get to that a little bit more. 1-2 through those first 3 weeks. Have them losing 2 straight. Saints and Tampa on Thursday Night Football, and then getting a win versus the Panthers, and that win streak is going to continue versus the Seahawks and at Tampa. That's going to take them to a loss with the Cowboys at Week 9. So at this point in time, going 500 through the record isn't too bad. Everything's still attainable for them, but you want to see if they're going to be a division winner, start to pull away in the second half of the season. After your breakdown, we'll get a little bit more into that.
So after their big 5-1 stretch, I do have them going 1-4 after that. So I have them losing to Seattle, losing in Tampa, getting a win over Dallas at home because Dallas sucks on the road.
Wow, so beating... Oh, wait, you had them losing to Philly? Losing to Philly. Okay.
I had them losing to Philly, yeah. So I have them losing to Seattle, losing to Tampa, beating Dallas, then losing to New Orleans. They're going to split with New Orleans there, but I do have them going on a 2-game stretch after that, beating 2 teams in the AFC West, in Denver and against the Chargers. And I'm gonna wrap it up, Steve. I'm going to go with them losing to Minnesota.
Wrap it up, Stay wrapped up.
They're going to lose. Always. Never.
I'm going to get Twan get all right now.
To cut it.
No.
I'm going to have Kirk losing.
Completely took him off his
I'm so off my rocker now. I'm so off my rocker. So I'm going to have them dropping a game to Minnesota. Going into Minnesota, Kirk's going to lose his revenge game. That's going to be the JJ game for me.
Okay.
And I get Terrell's really good. But I think JJ's better at playing wide receiver than Terrell is at playing in corner. They're going to get a win over Vegas, get a win over the Giants, lose to Washington, but finish off strong with a win over Carolina. 11-6 is the record. But the one thing that I want to talk about them, their traveling is very concerning to me.
Oh, it's a lot.
They are all over the place, from at home in Seattle, going to Tampa, that's not bad, but then you go to Dallas, to New Orleans, you come back home, New Orleans. Oh, this is the stretch that I'm talking about. You're in New Orleans, you go to Denver, then you come back home against the Chargers, you go to Minnesota, you go to Vegas, you come home again against the Giants, then you go to Washington, and then you come home again. So you're literally going like this.
That's a really tough stretch for a team that still needs to like prove themselves, honestly, and that's why I have them having a little bit of a lesser win total than you do. Only by 2 games. I have them going 9-8. Let's finish up here. I have them getting a win versus the Saints and a loss versus the Broncos to take us into the bye. The second half of the season, though, I have them getting 2 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins. I feel like the really defining game for their season is that Chargers game right there. I feel like that's a really important game for them to win. Like I talked about, that type of category that's not a top-tier echelon type team, but middle of the pack that can still be wild card. That's the type of conversation that they're in. So being able to split that between the Chargers and the Raiders, I feel like will be crucial. I do think like defensively, the Giants are just going to be a better team than the Falcons are, and I think that's the reason why they get that win. Personnel-wise, there's no reason why the Falcons should be below, a top 12 offensive unit by any means, especially where Kirk Cousins going in there getting the payday that he did.
So another team that could use a Thielen type wide receiver. I just don't know they would do it in the division.
Yeah.
But dude, that team, they had Thielen in that room, it would benefit big time because then you get London, Thielen, Pitts.
Absolutely. And I think what is the difference here for the Falcons and what gets them atop is their division record ends up being 4-2. With Tampa, I only have them splitting and going 3-3. So obviously we know that those division records make huge implications to what the playoffs really look like. But I actually have Tampa coming in with the same exact record. So they're both going 9-8. Both potentially playoff teams, too, with the NFC playoff picture, the way everything shakes out. We'll talk about that towards the back end because we can't tell you the East and the West yet. You just got to wait and find out. But starting off with Tampa, I had them going, splitting their first 6 games. So 3 wins, 3 losses. You get some division opponents in there. They split versus the Falcons and the Saints. Lost versus the Eagles. I feel like that's tough after the playoff game that they had last year. The Eagles aren't going to forget that. They're going to get their revenge back. Starting off the season with a win versus Washington is huge, but playing the Lions week 2 after they lose to the Rams, I just feel like they're going to be looking to get in the right direction. They're going to have that bad taste in their mouth. But through 6 weeks, I think 500 is a very fair spot for Tampa, and I think that's better expectations than what anybody kind of had assumed for Tampa Bay, especially last year. Going into this year, I think it's very similar expectations. You paid Baker Mayfield. Mike Evans had one of his better seasons with what you would say is his least talented quarterback. So just looking for that to continue. Rashad White took a new level. Obviously, Chris Godwin still being there, and, they invest in the defensive side of the ball. It's what they do.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm right there with you through 6 weeks. I got them going 500, win against Washington. It's literally win, loss, win, loss, win, loss.
Yeah.
It's win against Washington, lose against Detroit, win against Denver, lose against Philly, win against Atlanta, lose against New Orleans.
Yeah.
But I do have them dropping that next game to Baltimore. I think it's a tough win after that.
I have them winning that one. So I think that's when things really start to different, and I think your expectations is probably like the Ravens are still going to be very competitive of a football team. That's not to say that they're not at this point in time. I just feel like this is a playoff team, and where they're home versus the Ravens, I think it's a different Ravens team than going to Baltimore. I mean, I saw last year with my own eyes the Baltimore Ravens pick apart your Lions 35-0 through 3 quarters. That was game to see for sure. And
they'll be one of those games this year.
No, I'm sure there will be. But this is when I'm hoping to start to travel to some of these games. Definitely going to sneak out to a couple stadiums this year. So hoping to see how that works out. After you have their loss to the Ravens, I have a win versus the Ravens. I actually have them dropping 3 straight after that. So lost Falcons, Chiefs, 49ers. That's a really tough stretch. And you're talking about 3 primetime games within 5 weeks for Tampa Bay. I think that's really lofty expectations. So through 10 weeks being 4-6, not the start that they want, but the second half of the season helps make up for that.
We're damn close. I think I have them 4-6 as well, but I have them rattling off some wins. So losing to KC, losing to San Fran, I have them beating the Giants, beating Carolina, and then losing to Vegas. And then they get a 4-game stretch at the end of the season. So I do think they're going to be one of those teams that come on stronger and really start to go, we can make the playoffs if we make that big push.
Yeah.
Do you want to finish the Final Four before I go?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the bye week, 3 wins in a row versus the Giants, Panthers, Raiders. I think that those are all really close games, all really important for their win total, and just as important for the opposing teams as well. Like the Giants and Raiders, that'll be big point in times in their season. But after that, a loss at the Chargers, tough road game. Win versus the Cowboys. I think traveling to Jerry's World, getting a win on Sunday Night Football would be huge, but I think Tampa kind of has the mold to do it, like to beat a Dallas team like that. A win versus the Panthers week 17, a loss week 18 versus the Saints, which would have Tampa with a 9-8 record, having one last division win, which would have them, competing for a 5, 6, 7 seed in the wild card, finishing just under the Falcons, who are so lucky to, just edge out Tampa in the division race.
Yeah, so I got them finishing 3-4 to finish the season, also bringing them to 9-8. So I have them right there, fringe wild card in the West. 9-8 can make the wild card.
Yeah.
I don't know that in the East 9-8 makes the wild card.
No, in the NFC you're saying?
AFC. I don't know that the AFC 9-8 makes the wild card.
Yeah, in the NFC.
I think in the NFC it can.
It does.
I think
absolutely.
it can get a 7 spot.
Yeah, and you talk about one game going differently on the schedule, and that's a 10-win football team, and that's my whole takeaway with the Falcons too. Is 10-7 isn't as dominating of a statement record as it was a little bit prior, back in the day and things like that. But I had the Texans winning 10 games, and that's a good AFC team. You know what I mean? So where these teams are both winning 9 games, they win one more. You're talking about that's a 10-win team is the difference of potentially being a 3 or a 4 seed, maybe even a 2 depending on the conference, compared to falling towards the back end. But yeah, it wouldn't even be surprising if there was an 8-win football team in the NFC that could potentially make some noise here. But obviously, towards the back end of the episode, we have to talk about fantasy football and all the perspectives that we have in here. So let's go to the Saints first. We got Chris Olave, and then we got Drake London on the Falcons talking about wide receiver rooms. Olave had a very strong year, but I would say London had his strongest year to date last season. Just kind of wanted to know your thoughts and where you're thinking, some guys like that can go. What are they thinking as far as a yard total, and what's the wide receiver you'd prefer to have between those guys? Because I think the quarterback move for the Falcons definitely, makes an implication on that.
100% does, and I think Olave is the more skilled guy. I just don't know how it's going to work with Carr. I think that Rattler has a chance to help rejuvenate that, and I also think the Saints are going to be losing more. When you're looking at Olave, his ceiling is higher than London's, I think, still. I think you still got to look at him as a 2nd or 3rd round guy.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Probably
second round?
Yeah, probably 2nd round. That's where he's been going in my drafts for a while.
For Olave, you're saying?
Yeah. I think when you look at London, I think it's going to be one behind him. I think there's just going to be that stigma with London where, again, there's more weapons on that team. There's more mouths to feed, whereas Olave, he commands a ball.
With Olave, and you talking about a round 2 type of player, I just want to toss, some other names that could potentially be round 2 guys. Are you taking Olave over Devontae Adams with his quarterback scenario? It's a close conversation.
I don't think so.
I'm not either.
I think I'm taking Adams, but I do like Vegas' scenario more than a lot of other people do. I do think Minshew is serviceable. I think Aiden O'Connell's also serviceable.
Yeah.
I think both are on the same level as Derek Carr. If not, they have higher ceilings to me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
So,
you taking Mike Evans over Chris Olave?
No, I think I'm taking Olave.
Really? Oh, that's close.
I like Evans a lot, but it is super cool. But at some point,
Olave's gonna make a case. He's gonna break the scene.
Some point, Evans is gonna get really heavy with his points at the end of the season. The way I have the Buck stretch going is at the end of the season where it's now fantasy playoffs or the season's over.
Yeah,
that's a really tough one. Because last year, Evans dropped so far.
I just think it's without knowing what some of those injuries are and things like that. I just think it's tough to say 2 for Olave. 3, 4, I think is more the conversation. Depends on the quantity of people in your league as well. Because you start talking 12, 14, then it's a no-brainer. He's obviously in that conversation. But I'm still drafting a Josh Jacobs over an Olave in a round 2.
Maybe this year, yeah. But I know you love your running backs.
I do. Yeah,
I've come to the point where I'm dude, I would love to have some of the top tier running backs, but if it's going to be between me drafting a 14-point per week running back or being I got a 20-point receiver, I'm just going to take the fucking receiver.
Okay.
And load up, and hopefully I can trade around later in the year.
Yeah, especially with the conversation of PPR and stuff like that, it adds a tier to the conversation for sure. To the running back position, though, we saw Rachaad White break out the scene last year.
He's that dude.
And really, proved a lot of people wrong. So Is it crazy to say out of this division that he's the running back to have over, a Kamara or a Bijan?
Bijan's the guy to have again.
Is it?
This is the year.
Yeah.
I promise it's this time. It's this time. He was great last year, but he was not.
He was controlled, like by Arthur Smith.
He literally, it was a weapon that he just didn't want to use.
Which was so weird. Let's give it to Algier, a 5th-round BYU running back. Yeah.
You let it fly with Bijan this year. You go off because at some point you're not going to have him on a rookie contract. You're going to have to pay him. And we see sometimes, as running backs' careers go, they don't deteriorate, but their years are less and less successful. It's harder to be a successful running back in your second contract. That's just how it is.
For sure.
You run Bijan to the ground right now.
Yeah.
And you get the best you can get out of him. He is, and because he is the most skilled.
Do you think Bijan's a first round
yes,
pick?
100%.
Yeah?
Yeah. 100%. And he won't go first round because people are just going to look at last year and say, well, why would he do better?
Yeah.
Well, people aren't going to look at the fact that Arthur Smith's not the coach anymore. Arthur Smith is good with running backs usually too, so I don't know what was going on. He just wanted to hold
He was too
Bijan
finesse
back.
for Arthur Smith, honestly.
Dude, yeah. Algier is more his type of back, but not that I don't. I think Raheem Morris is going to be smart enough to go. Listen, I got to make a splash with this Falcons team, and I think that Bijan's also going to play more than running back. He's going to play slot receiver. He's going to do a lot of different things, and he's the guy over anyone else. Like Rashad can run the ball well. Bijan's the guy that can put one move on you and the entire defense falls over and he's gone.
Yeah. Are you taking Rashad White over Alvin Kamara?
Yeah.
Yeah? You sound pretty
so.
comfortable saying that.
Yeah. I really like Rashad White. I really like Bijan a little bit more. So Rashad White he's a top 3 round guy for sure. Maybe top 2. Again, depends on how your draft is shaken out. But I think Bijan's in the first round. I think Kamara's in the 3 or 4, where I think White is 2-3.
Okay. And, last question as far as a fantasy perspective goes. The Atlanta Falcons brought in Kirk Cousins, and this is usually a guy that's typically, expected to be a fantasy starting quarterback. Do you feel like he can have a bit of a slow start in Atlanta where he might not be, as dominant on the fantasy football front? And do you think, a guy like Trevor Lawrence might be a little bit of a better fantasy quarterback option than Kirk Cousins while he gets acclimated to a new system and overcomes an injury?
That's a really good question. I think he can start a little bit slow for Kirk because I think that team can win some games with defense. But as the season progresses, listen, everyone's going to talk about Penix. Well, you just play Penix at some point, right? Not this year.
Yeah.
Not this year. Let him sit. Let him learn. Don't discourage him too early. I'm going to say Kirk is going to have the better fantasy season. But I do see him starting slower than Trevor to start the year.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with Kirk because I'm going to ride it out. But if I'm taking Kirk, I am taking another good quarterback to make sure that I'm safe. I'm taking an Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And obviously, Anthony Richardson, I feel like is and correct me, if I'm wrong according to your opinion, but I feel like he's going to be a really big boomer bust guy. He has the potential to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, but if injuries still hamper him, this is a guy that isn't going to be in that type of a conversation. Tuan, before we wrap up this episode, any bold predictions coming out of this division specifically as you drop your water cap?
You caught it. Bold predictions out of this division specifically. I mean, we talked about Xavier Legette. I think he is going to have a good fantasy season.
Give me
I think he is
line.
going to show 97 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns.
6. Okay. Very, very, very respectable stat line. I feel like that's really realistic for a Panthers wide receiver.
He's a rookie guy. I think he's going to play really well. Pitts is back. Pitts is back this year.
Okay.
You want a stat line for Pitts? Fine, I'll give you a stat line.
All right, yeah. I didn't even have to say it, so I love it. Before you even get to the stat line, is this somebody that's going to be worth drafting before round 7 in fantasy football?
It's going to be spicy, but I think so. I think 6, 7 is where you want to. I think Pitts is back this year, man. I think this is going to be the season that he finally breaks out. 70 catches. Dare I say 1,000 yards? Wow. 70 catches, 1,000 yards.
For Pitts.
5 touchdowns.
So, and that's with the expectation that he becomes pretty much the number 2 passing option.
Yes, 100%. And that's what I think he will be.
Yeah.
And I think Kirk can bring him there.
All right. Since the Sandbox fans, That's going to wrap things up for the NFC South schedule predictions. The next is the East. So all you Patriots fans, get ready. All you Giants fans, I'm talking to myself.
17-0.
Yeah, stop it. We're really excited to get to the East and, get to the back end of, these schedule predictions that'll take us through, the beginning of July, right before we get into fantasy football. So excited about that. Once we get into July, we have a live episode at Sammy Carlos coming up, and they're sponsoring our 5-year event. So shout out to them. Always, kudos to our guy Stevie at Sammy Carlos. Makes a mean sub. Can't wait to have the 6-foot subs at the event and a couple trays of pizza.
One of them's just for me.
Yeah, right. Really excited for all that. But thank you again to Workbar for allowing us to come into your new studio. This was really fun, and hopefully we get to come back again, and you guys liked having us. But we'll be back in the Cincy Sandbox Studios tomorrow for the East. Yep. Excited to break it down, run it down, and once again, we'll see you August 17th for the 5-year event. You guys know the deal. Peace, love, 5 stars, nothing less.